Hello, my dear friends. My name is Dorothy. I'm 74 years old, and I'm a great-grandmother to 8 precious little ones. Please, come sit with me on my porch swing, because I have a story that will make your blood boil and hopefully give you the courage you might need. If you could hit that like button and tell me in the comments what state you're calling home from, I'd be so grateful. This story, well, it's about discovering that the man sleeping next to you every night has been stealing from your family for years. It was October 2018. I had been married to my husband Frank for 48 years. We married in 1970, when I was 22, and he was 24. Frank worked as a manager at the local utility company, and I taught 3rd grade until our children were born. We had built what I thought was a solid, comfortable life. Our mortgage was paid off. We had a nice retirement savings, and Frank always handled our finances. "Don't you worry your pretty head about money, Dottie," he'd say. "That's what husbands are for." For 48 years, I trusted him completely. I thought we were a team, building our future together. I thought our money was safe, our retirement secure, our children's inheritance protected. I had no idea that for nearly a decade, Frank had been systematically draining our accounts to fund a relationship with another woman, and when I found out how much he'd stolen from our family, well, let's just say this little old lady learned she had some fight left in her. Because, sweethearts, when someone steals from your children's future, when they lie to your face while emptying your bank account, when they risk your security for their selfish pleasure, that's when you discover what you're really made of. Asterisk. Let me tell you about our life before I discovered Frank's betrayal. My dear friends, we lived in a beautiful colonial house on Elmwood Drive, bought it in 1975 for $32,000. Can you believe that? Today, that same house is worth over $300,000. Frank made good money at the electric company by the 1990s. He was earning about $55,000 a year, which was excellent for our small town. I stayed home with our 3 children, Jennifer, born in 1972, Michael in 1975, and our youngest, Sarah, in 1978. Frank was the family financial manager. Every Friday, he'd deposit his paycheck, pay our bills, and put money into our savings. He'd show me the bank statements sometimes, pointing to our growing balance with such pride. "Look at that, Dottie. We're doing real good." I was so proud of our financial discipline. While other couples our age were struggling or living paycheck to paycheck, we seemed to have it figured out. Frank would say, "We'll retire comfortably, travel a bit, leave something nice for the kids." Every month, Frank would sit at our kitchen table with his calculator, checkbook, and stack of bills. He had this little ritual. He'd put on his reading glasses, line up his pens, and methodically work through everything. "Dorothy," he'd call out, "come see how well we're doing this month." Our children never wanted for anything important. College, funds, braces when needed, family vacations to Florida every summer. Jennifer's wedding in 1995 cost us $18,000, and Frank paid for it without blinking. "Nothing's too good for our princess," he said. I trusted Frank completely with our money. When friends would talk about financial problems in their marriages, I'd feel so grateful. "Frank's responsible," I'd tell them. "He's always thinking about our future." In 2008, when Frank turned 62, we started serious retirement planning. He showed me statements showing we had about $280,000 in our 401k and savings combined. "See, Dottie, we did it right. We can retire comfortably." I felt so secure, so proud of what we'd built together. I thought Frank's careful money management was one of his greatest qualities as a husband. If only I had known that while he was showing me those statements, he was already stealing from us to pay for another woman's lifestyle. Asterisk. The first sign something was wrong came in 2016. Sweethearts, Frank was 70, I was 68, and we were supposed to be enjoying our golden years, but little things started not adding up. It began with the credit card bills. For years, Frank had used our MasterCard for everything: gas, groceries, occasional dinners, out. The monthly balance was usually around $800 to $1,200, predictable, reasonable, but suddenly, I started noticing charges I didn't recognize. $150 at restaurants I'd never heard of, $300 at department stores where I'd never shopped. When I asked Frank about them, he'd get slightly irritated. "Dorothy, I took my buddy Jim out for his retirement dinner. You remember Jim, don't you?" Or, "I bought my sister a birthday gift at Macy's. Did you forget it was her birthday?" The explanations always made sense. Frank was generous with friends and family. but something in his tone, it was different. Defensive, in a way Frank had never been before. Then there were the cash withdrawals. Frank had always been a pay-by-check kind of man. But suddenly he was taking out $200, $300 at a time from ATM. When I asked why he needed so much cash, he'd say, "Gas prices are crazy. Dottie, it's easier to pay cash." But here's what really bothered me. Frank started receiving phone calls that he'd take outside. "Work stuff," he'd say, stepping onto the porch, but Frank had been retired for 2 years. What work stuff? In early 2017, I noticed Frank was dressing better. New shirts, nicer cologne, even got his hair cut more frequently. "Frank," I said one day, "you're looking quite handsome lately." He just smiled and said, "Can't an old man take pride in his appearance?" The biggest red flag came when our daughter Jennifer asked about borrowing money for her son's college expenses. "Dad always said you guys had money saved for emergencies like this," she said. When I mentioned it to Frank, his reaction shocked me. "Money's tighter than it used to be, Dorothy. The market's been rough. We need to be more careful." But I thought our money was in safe investments. When had the market affected us? That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrible. I hadn't seen a bank statement in over 2 years. Frank always said he'd handle the paperwork and keep me from worrying about boring financial stuff. For the first time in our marriage, I started wondering what Frank was hiding. My dear friends, there comes a moment in every woman's life when she has to choose between comfortable ignorance and uncomfortable truth. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in March 2018. Frank had gone to his weekly breakfast with the boys, his retired co-workers group. I decided it was time to find out what our real financial situation was. I went to Frank's desk in our home office. For years, this had been his domain, and I'd respected that. But as I sat in his chair, looking at files I'd never examined, I felt like a detective in my own home. The first shock came when I opened our checking account folder. The balance was $3,247. $3,000. Sweethearts, I remembered Frank showing me statements with much higher balances. Where had our money gone? Then, I found the credit card statements Frank had been handling for me. What I saw made my hands shake. Charges for expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, clothing, boutiques, even a spa, all places I'd never been to. But the most devastating discovery was a receipt tucked inside a folder marked tax papers. It was from a high-end jewelry store for a $2,800 necklace purchased 3 months earlier. I'd never seen this necklace. Frank had never given me a $2,800 gift in our entire marriage. I called the bank to get copies of all our statements for the past 3 years. "Mrs. Patterson," the nice young man said, "I can email those to you right away. Is everything all right?" When those statements arrived, my children, I sat at my kitchen table and wept. Over 3 years, Frank had withdrawn over $78,000 in unexplained cash and credit card advances. $78,000 from our retirement savings. I made a list of every suspicious transaction. Restaurants in the next town over, $150, $200, $250 dinners for 2. Hotel charges when Frank claimed to be at home with me. Cash advances on days when Frank said he was running simple errands. The pattern was clear. Frank was living a double life, and he was using our money to pay for it. That evening, when Frank came home whistling and asking about dinner, I looked at this man I'd loved for 48 years and realized I was looking at a stranger, a thief, a liar, who had been stealing our future to fund his affair. "How was breakfast with the boys?" I asked, my voice steady. "Oh, you know how it is," Frank replied, loosening his tie. "Same old stories, same old complaints about their wives, same old lies," I thought, because I had called Jim's wife that afternoon. There hadn't been a breakfast meeting in over 6 months. The confrontation came the following Saturday, my dear friends. I had spent a week gathering evidence, and I was ready for answers. I waited until Frank finished his morning coffee. Then I placed the bank statements, credit card bills, and that jewelry receipt on our kitchen table. "Frank," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about our money." I watched his face change as he saw the papers. The color drained from his cheeks, and for the first time in our marriage, Frank looked genuinely afraid. "Dorothy, I can explain this," I said, pointing to the jewelry receipt. "Who did you buy a $2,800 necklace for? Because it certainly wasn't me." Frank's hands started shaking. It was ... It was for your birthday. I was planning to surprise you. My birthday was 8 months ago, Frank. And this was purchased last December. The lies came tumbling out then. The jewelry was for his sister. The restaurant charges were business dinners. The cash withdrawals were for home improvements he was planning to surprise me with. Every excuse sounded more desperate than the last. Finally, I slammed my hand on the table. Enough, I said, louder than I'd ever spoken to Frank in 48 years. I called the restaurants, Frank. I called your sister. I called Jim about your breakfast meetings. I know you're lying about everything. That's when Frank broke down, right there at our kitchen table. This 72-year-old man started crying like a child. Dorothy, I never meant for it to go this far. It started so innocently. Her name is Linda. She works at the bank downtown. We just started talking. And then, the truth came pouring out. Linda was 58, divorced, struggling financially. Frank had been helping her for 3 years, paying her rent, buying her gifts, taking her on trips, he told me, were fishing weekends with his buddies. How much, Frank? I asked, my voice ice cold. How much of our money did you give to this woman? Frank couldn't meet my eyes. About $80,000, he whispered. $80,000, my children, our retirement security, our emergency fund, our children's inheritance, given to a woman Frank barely knew because she made him feel young and needed. She told me she might lose her apartment, Frank said through tears. I couldn't let that happen. You're so strong, Dorothy. You don't need me the way she does. In that moment, I realized Frank hadn't just stolen our money. He'd stolen our trust, our future, and our peace of mind to feed his ego with another woman's false helplessness. After Frank's confession, my dear friends, I did something that surprised even me. I didn't scream, I didn't throw things, I didn't call him names. Instead, I told him to pack a bag and stay at his brother's house while I decided what to do. Dorothy, please, Frank begged. We can work this out. I'll end it with Linda. Get our money back. Frank, I said, looking him straight in the eye, you've been lying to me for 3 years. How can I believe anything you say now? After Frank left, I sat in our quiet house and made a plan. Because you see, sweethearts, I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a woman who had been financially abused, and I was going to treat it like the crime it was. First, I called our daughter Jennifer. She's a lawyer, and I needed legal advice. When I told her what her father had done, the silence on the phone lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Mom, she finally said, Dad stole from you. This isn't just marriage problems. This could be considered financial elder abuse. Jennifer helped me gather all the evidence properly. We made copies of every statement, every receipt, every suspicious transaction. We created a timeline showing exactly when Frank's theft had escalated. Next, I went to the bank and spoke with the manager about Frank's unauthorized use of our joint accounts. Mrs. Patterson, he said, what your husband did may constitute fraud, especially if he forged your signature on any withdrawals. Then I did something Frank never expected. I drove to Linda's apartment complex and knocked on her door. Linda answered, and I could see why Frank was smitten. She was attractive, well-dressed, and looked genuinely shocked to see me. You must be Dorothy, she said quietly. Frank's told me so much about you. I'm sure he has, I replied. Now I'd like to hear your side of the story. What Linda told me next broke my heart in a different way. Frank had told her we were essentially separated, living like roommates for financial convenience. He said I knew about their relationship and didn't care as long as he was discreet. He said you had your own interests and didn't need him emotionally anymore. Linda explained, tears in her eyes. He made it sound like you were both just waiting for the right time to divorce. Linda had no idea Frank was stealing from our retirement to fund their relationship. She thought he was a well-off widower who enjoyed spoiling her. When I showed her the bank statements, she went pale. Mrs. Patterson, I never would have accepted anything if I'd known he was taking it from your savings. I'm not a home. I thought I was helping a lonely man enjoy his golden years. In that moment, I realized Linda wasn't my enemy. She was another victim of Frank's lies and manipulation. What happened next? My children proved that sometimes the truth really can set you free, even when it's painful. Linda and I worked together to document everything Frank had given her over 3 years, the jewelry, the rent payments, the vacation trips, even a used car he'd bought for her. She insisted on returning everything she still had. I don't want anything that came from stealing from your family. She said, Frank made me unknowingly participate in hurting you, and I won't keep benefiting from that. Linda returned $12,000 worth of jewelry and gave me the car's title. She also provided receipts and records that helped us trace exactly where our money had gone. When Frank found out Linda and I had met, he panicked. He came home begging, promising to make everything right. But it was too late for promises. Frank, I told him, you didn't just have an affair. You committed financial fraud against your own family. Our children's inheritance, our medical emergency fund, our security. You gambled it all away for your ego. I filed for divorce and demanded full financial disclosure. What we discovered was even worse than I'd thought. Frank had also borrowed against his life insurance policy and taken early withdrawals from his 401k, paying massive penalties. The total damage was $127,000. Money we'd spent 48 years saving, gone to fund Frank's midlife crisis. But here's where the story gets interesting, sweethearts. Frank's employer had a strict ethics policy about financial misconduct. When word got out about what he'd done, they launched an investigation into his retirement account management. Turns out Frank had been borrowing from the company's retirement fund during his last year of work, intending to pay it back before anyone noticed. He hadn't. Frank faced criminal charges for embezzlement. At 72 years old, my husband of 48 years was arrested, fingerprinted, and faced the possibility of prison time. The community we'd lived in for decades learned the truth about Frank Patterson. The man everyone thought was a pillar of responsibility was revealed as a common thief who stole from his own family. Linda moved away, unable to face the shame of having unknowingly participated in Frank's crimes. She sent me a letter saying she'd learned never to trust a man who spoke poorly of his wife. Frank ultimately pleaded guilty to lesser charges and was sentenced to community service and financial restitution. But the damage to his reputation was permanent. Today, at 74 years old, I can tell you that discovering Frank's financial betrayal was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. The divorce was finalized in 2019. I got the house, half of Frank's remaining retirement funds, and, most importantly, I got my independence back. I learned to manage my own finances for the first time in my adult life. My children helped me set up online banking, investment accounts, and a budget that puts me in control of my money. You know what I discovered? I'm actually quite good with finances, better than Frank ever was. In 2 years, I've grown my savings, more than Frank did in the last 5 years of our marriage. I work part-time now at a financial literacy nonprofit, teaching other women, especially older women, how to protect themselves from financial abuse. Because that's what it was, sweethearts. Abuse. Frank lives in a small apartment across town. He tried to reconcile several times. But I learned something important. A man who will steal from his own family's future is not a man worthy of trust. Our children have their own relationships with their father, but they've made it clear they're proud of how I handled the situation. Mom, Jennifer told me, watching you stand up for yourself taught me more about strength than any law school class ever did. Linda and I exchange Christmas cards now. She's doing well, found a job in another state, and is dating a man who's honest about his situation. You saved me from making a terrible mistake, she wrote last year. Thank you for showing me what real integrity looks like. My advice to you, my dear friends, especially if you're in a long marriage where one person controls all the finances, know where your money is. Always ask questions, request statements, trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. Love doesn't require financial blindness. And if you discover you've been betrayed, financially or otherwise, remember that you're stronger than you know. It's never too late to take control of your life, your money, and your dignity. I'm 74 years old, and these have been the most empowering 3 years of my life, not because my marriage ended, but because I finally learned who Dorothy was when she wasn't defined by someone else's lies. Thank you for listening to my story. Sweethearts, please share it with anyone who might need to hear it. And remember, your financial security is too important to leave in someone else's hands, even someone you love. Until next time, this is Dorothy reminding you that it's never too late to protect what's rightfully yours.